The entire ballroom froze when the maid looked the Duke in the eye and refused to kneel. Not defiance for its own sake. Not rebellion dressed as courage. She simply stood, back straight, hands at her sides, eyes meeting his with the specific, unblinking steadiness of a woman who has decided, in the space of a breath, that there are things she will not do regardless of the consequence. The consequence, everyone in that room understood, was dismissal. Immediate. Public. The kind that follows a woman from one household to the next and ensures she never works in a house of this caliber again. 60 people held their breath. The Duke of Ashmore looked at the maid who had just refused to kneel before him. In his own ballroom, in front of his guests, on the night of the autumn gathering that was the social centerpiece of the county season, and said nothing for 4 seconds. For seconds that lasted a year. Then he said, quietly, to the room at large, "Leave us." Nobody moved. Now, he said, they moved. When the ballroom was empty, when 60 people had shuffled and murmured their way through the gilt doors and the doors had closed behind them, the Duke looked at the maid who was still standing exactly as she had been standing, and said, "What is your name?" "Seraphine Vale," she said. "Why did you not kneel, Miss Vale?" She looked at him directly. "Because I have done nothing to be ashamed of," she said. "And I only kneel when I have." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "Come to my study tomorrow morning," he said. 8 o'clock. He left the ballroom. She stood in the empty room alone, in the candlelight, and felt the full weight of what she had just done settle over her like weather. She did not know, standing there, that the morning meeting would not be her dismissal. She did not know that the Duke had recognized something in that ballroom. A small, silver brooch at her collar, almost invisible, that had not been worn by a parlor maid in this house for 27 years. She did not know that her refusal to kneel had nothing to do with why Caelan Ashmore intended to make her his wife. She did not know any of it yet, but she was about to find out. If you were standing where she stood, in that ballroom, in front of that Duke, would you kneel? Or would you stand your ground and risk everything? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if this story has already found its way under your skin, subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. Let us see how far this travels. Act 1. The Impossible Defiance. Seraphine Vale had been a parlor maid at Ashmore Hall for 11 months. She had come from the village of Crestwick, 4 miles east, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had died of fever when she was 19 and left her with a younger brother, a house that needed a new roof, and a practical understanding that the world did not arrange itself around sentiment. She had applied to the hall through the ordinary channels. She had been interviewed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Colm, a woman of 50 with a precise and comprehensive mind who had spent 30 years ensuring that Ashmore Hall's domestic machinery ran without visible effort. Mrs. Colm had interviewed 12 women and hired Seraphine. She had not explained why she chose her over the others. She never explained her decisions. But Seraphine had noticed, in the week that followed, that Mrs. Colm watched her more carefully than she watched the other staff, not with suspicion, but with the particular attention of someone waiting to confirm something they already believe. She had put this down to natural caution. She had not thought about it again until the night of the autumn gathering. The gathering was an annual tradition at Ashmore, 60 guests from the county's landed families, a week of hunting and dinners, and the particular social performance of people who know each other too well to be interesting to each other and have developed, over decades, the collective habit of performing interest anyway. The ballroom was opened. The kitchens produced 3 times their usual volume. The staff doubled their hours. Seraphine was assigned to the ballroom service, circulating with refreshments, managing the side tables, the invisible work of ensuring the room functioned without the guests having to think about how. She had been doing this for 2 hours when the incident happened. She had not seen the Duke enter. She had heard the shift in the room, The particular change of atmosphere that comes when authority enters a space, the way conversation adjusts and bodies orient. And she had been crossing from the east table with a tray when he appeared in her path. Not deliberately. The ballroom was crowded. She turned from the table and he was there, and there were people on every side, and there was no direction to step that was not obstructed. She stopped. The people around them stopped. And Lord Davin Crest, who had been standing 3 feet to the Duke's left, and whose expression, Seraphine would later remember, had the specific quality of a man who sees an opportunity and takes it before he has thought it through, said, with warm social amusement that was designed to carry, "The girl should kneel, Ashmore. Standards must be maintained." The room held its breath. Kneeling before the Duke in this context was not a formal requirement. It was a gesture, a social performance of deference that some households practiced and some did not. At Ashmore, Mrs. Colm's standing instruction was that the staff did not kneel before the family under ordinary circumstances. But Crest's public suggestion had changed the nature of the moment. It was no longer about household custom. It was about public demonstration. Seraphine looked at Lord Davin Crest. She looked at his expression, the warm, amused cruelty of a man who has no personal stake in her humiliation but finds it entertaining. She looked at the Duke. Kaelin Ashmore was looking at her with an expression she could not classify. Not expectation. Not the impatient authority she would have expected from a man in his position, in this moment, in front of his guests. Something more attentive than that. As though he was watching something he had not expected to see. She looked back at Crest. She stood her ground. And that was the defiance. Not a speech, not a declaration, not a dramatic gesture. Simply not kneeling. Simply being a person who declined, in one quiet, public, irreversible moment, to perform a humiliation she had not earned. She did not sleep well that night. This was honest. There was no point in pretending the composure she had maintained in the ballroom extended into the hours after, when she was in her room in the servants' quarters with the sounds of the house settling around her and the full consequences of the day arranged in front of her. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about her brother in Crestwick, about the roof, about the wage that had been making the difference between manageable and impossible for 11 months. If she was dismissed, she pressed this thought down. She had made the decision. It was made. Revisiting it served nothing. She looked at the brooch on her nightstand. She had worn it that evening without particular intention. It had been her mother's, a small silver piece in the shape of a foxglove, slightly worn at the pin. She wore it when she wanted to feel her mother close. On difficult evenings, on nights that felt too large for her. She had not thought about where she had seen it before. She had not known that Kaelin Ashmore had. She arrived at the study at 8 o'clock precisely. She knocked. She was admitted. The study was a working room, not the formal kind designed to impress visitors, but a room that was genuinely used, with papers on the desk and 2 maps on the wall and a quality of lived-in order that told her this was where the Duke actually spent his time. Books, but practical ones. Estate records. Agricultural surveys. The room of a man who managed things. He was standing at the window when she entered. He turned. He was, she observed for the first time in good light, not what she had expected. The county talked about the Duke of Ashmore in specific, well-worn terms. Feared, cold, exacting. The kind of man who had not smiled publicly since his father's death 7 years ago. The county was not entirely wrong, but it was describing the surface. What she saw in the study light was a man of 40, who had the particular quality of someone who has been paying very close attention to the world for a very long time, and finds most of what he observes either inadequate or dishonest. He looked at her the way she was looking at him. Directly. Without the social performance of not looking that most people of his station employed when dealing with staff. Sit down, he said. I prefer to stand, she said. Then, thank you. He looked at her. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Very well. He gestured to the chair anyway, in a way that suggested it was there if she changed her mind. He moved to the desk. He sat. The brooch at your collar last night, he said. Where did you get it? She had not expected this. It was my mother's, she said. And your mother's name? Wren Vale. Before her marriage, she was Wren Ashby. The room was very quiet. Something in his expression changed. The quality of attention shifted, became more specific, the way a man's face changes when an answer confirms something he has been holding at a distance for a long time. Your mother was from this area, he said. From Crestwick, Seraphine said. She lived there her whole life. She taught at the village school. A pause. Why are you asking about my mother? Sit down, Miss Vale, he said. Something in his voice was different. Not softer exactly. More careful. The voice of a man who is managing the pace of something he does not want to handle incorrectly. She sat. He opened the top drawer of his desk. He withdrew a small object and placed it on the surface between them. A brooch. Silver. In the shape of a foxglove. Almost identical to the one at her collar. She looked at it. She looked at him. My grandmother's, he said. Given by her to her eldest daughter, who left this estate 28 years ago under circumstances that were not well managed. He held her gaze. Her name was Lisa Ashmore. She left in secret. She changed her name. We believed for many years that she had died. Seraphine looked at the brooch. Lisa Ashmore, she said slowly. My father's sister, he said. My aunt. He paused. Which would make you? No, she said. She stood up. Whatever you are about to say. Your mother was Lisa Ashmore's daughter, he said. Which makes you? I know what it makes me, she said, and her voice was entirely steady, which cost her considerably. I want to know why you are telling me this in a private study the morning after I refused to kneel in your ballroom. I want to know what you intend to do with this information. He looked at her. I intend, he said, to do the thing that should have been done 28 years ago, which is, restore what was taken from your family, he said, and correct what my father did. She sat back down. Her legs had decided this without consulting the rest of her. Tell me, she said, what your father did. He told her about Lisa Ashmore over the course of the next 2 hours, in the study, while the autumn morning moved outside and the house began its daily machinery around them. Lisa had been the eldest child of the 4th Duke, Edmund's sister, 18 years Edmund's senior, already a young woman when Edmund was born. She had been brilliant, her brothers said, in the way that people who are brilliant before the century permits them to be are brilliant, privately, quietly, in the margins of the life they are assigned. She had managed the estate accounts from the age of 17 because she was better at them than anyone the family employed. She had read everything in the library and argued with tutors brought for her younger brother and had been, by every available account, precisely the kind of person the Ashmore estate required to run itself well. She had also fallen in love with a schoolteacher from Crestwick. His name was Thomas Vale. He was 24. He had no money, no title, no connection to any family whose connection mattered. He had, by the accounts of people who knew him, a quality of honest and uncomplicated goodness that was approximately the opposite of everything the Ashmore family stood for. Lisa's father had discovered the correspondence between them and had given her a choice. End it or leave. She had left. In the night, with the foxglove brooch and nothing else of material value. She had gone to Crestwick. She had married Thomas Vale. She had had a daughter, Wren. She never came back, Seraphine said. She was not asking. She was placing it, putting her mother's history, which she had known in fragments and silences, into the architecture that was forming around it. She wrote, Calen said, Once, to my father, when her husband died. She had a daughter. She had very little money. She asked. She did not ask for much. For a small sum. Enough to pay a debt. He paused. My father did not reply. Seraphine was very still. He did not reply, she said. No. She wrote to him, his own sister, with a child and a dead husband and a debt, and he did not reply. That is correct. She looked at the desk. She looked at the foxglove brooch sitting on it. She thought about her mother, Vale, née Ashby, née Ashmore, who had raised Seraphine and her brother on a schoolteacher's wage in a house with a leaking roof, who had worn the foxglove brooch every Sunday and told Seraphine it had been he. Her grandmothers, who had died at 43 without ever telling either of her children who their grandmother was. She never told us, Seraphine said. She may not have considered herself an Ashmore by then, he said. Or she may have been protecting you. From hope, perhaps. Hope in these situations is its own kind of liability. She looked at him. You said you wanted to restore what was taken. What does that mean, practically? He was quiet for a moment. It means that Lisa Ashmore's descendants have a legitimate claim to a portion of this estate's income. The legal structure is complex. My solicitor has been examining it since yesterday evening. Since yesterday evening, she said. Before this morning's meeting. I recognized the brooch last night, he said. As soon as you were in the room. He paused. It is not something I was likely to miss. There are portraits upstairs. She processed this. He had recognized her heritage in the ballroom, in the middle of the confrontation with Crest, in the moment after she refused to kneel. And he had not acted on it immediately. He had cleared the room, asked her name, sent her away to sleep on it. He had spent the evening with his solicitor. And the proposal, she said. Because Lord Crest's version of last night's events is presumably making its way through the county as we speak. The staff have certainly talked. Yes, he said. So managing the story becomes part of this. It is a consideration, he said carefully. Not a consideration, she said. That is precisely the wrong word. A consideration is something you weigh against alternatives. You have no alternative. If it becomes publicly known that the maid who refused to kneel in your ballroom is Lisa Ashmore's granddaughter, and it will become known, these things always do, then the story manages itself, and you manage nothing. She looked at him. So the question is whether you propose marriage because it is the right resolution to a legitimate inheritance question, or because it is the most efficient management of a social problem. He was very quiet. Both, he said. I want to be honest with you. She looked at him for a long moment. That, she said, is the most useful thing you have said this morning. The proposal was made formally in the drawing room on the following Thursday, in the presence of Mrs. Colm and Orlon Fitch, the estate's steward, who served as witnesses. Not because the proposal required witnesses, it did not, but because Seraphine had requested it. Why? Kaelin had asked, when she made the request. Because I want there to be people present, she said, who will remember what was said and what was not said, so that neither of us is ever in a position of claiming the other agreed to something different. He had looked at her. You don't trust me. I trust your intentions, she said. I am not yet certain they and your actions are the same thing. That is not distrust. That is accuracy. He had agreed to witnesses. In the drawing room, in the presence of Mrs. Colm and Fitch, he stated the terms clearly. The proposal was a genuine one. The marriage, should she accept, would not be a management exercise. She would have full household authority. The inheritance question would be resolved separately through legal channels and was not conditional on the marriage. She could decline the proposal, and the inheritance matter would proceed regardless. She looked at him across the room. If I accept, she said, I accept as myself. Not as a convenient solution to a bloodline problem, and not as a maid who has been elevated by luck. As Seraphine Vale, whose grandmother left this house because your grandfather gave her an impossible choice and your father didn't have the decency to answer her letter. Yes, he said, and you understand that I will not manage my opinions for social convenience. I am aware of this, he said, with something at the corner of his expression. That was, she was almost certain, suppressed amusement. And you understand that I will require time. Miss Vale, he said. Yes. I am not asking you to decide today. She looked at him. Then why are we in the drawing room? Because you requested witnesses, he said, and I thought it would be discourteous to keep Mrs. Colm waiting in the corridor. Mrs. Colm, who had been standing near the door with the expression of a woman who has been in this house for 30 years and is only surprised by very specific things, made a sound that was not quite a cough. Seraphine looked at her. Mrs. Colm's expression said, I have known about this since before you arrived. Seraphine looked at the housekeeper, then at the Duke, then at the foxglove brooch on her own collar. I am going to need a week, she said. You have too, he said. She left the drawing room. In the corridor, she stopped. She pressed her hand flat against the wall and stood for a moment in the specific, grounding way she had developed during difficult situations, feeling the physical reality of the surface under her palm, the temperature of it, the texture. Real. Present. Here. She was the grandchild of a woman who had been expelled from this house for loving a schoolteacher. She was standing in that house's corridor being given 2 weeks to decide whether to become its duchess. She thought about her mother, about Wren Vale sitting in the school in Crestwick, teaching other people's children the things she knew, wearing the foxglove brooch every Sunday, never saying whose it had been or what it meant. She thought about what her mother would have said if she had known. She thought she knew. She did not give him an answer in the first week. She continued her work, the morning rooms, the drawing room service, the ordinary machinery of her position, because she had decided that stopping her work during the consideration period would change the nature of the consideration. She needed to think from inside her actual life, not from the elevated position of someone who had already made the decision. So she worked, and she watched, and she learned things about Caelan Ashmore that the county did not know. He was, in the first instance, nothing like the story. The story said feared. The reality said respected, with a specific, earned quality of respect that was different from fear, the respect of people who have been dealt with fairly consistently over a long period of time. The tenant farmers, when she rode out with Fitch on the Thursday morning to observe an estate inspection, were not the cowed, anxious tenants she would have expected from the county version of this man. They were direct with him. One of them, a broad, weathered man named Briggs who had the manner of someone who does not modify his speech for anyone, argued with the Duke for 20 minutes about the drainage in the East Field, and the Duke argued back with the focused attention of someone genuinely engaging with the problem rather than managing a person. Briggs won the argument. Caelan ordered the drainage work to begin the following week. She observed this from horseback and filed it. She observed, in the second instance, how he treated the staff. Not warmly. He was not a man who performed warmth, and she appreciated this because she had no patience for performance, but with a consistent, matter-of-fact courtesy that was its own kind of respect. He learned names. He did not pretend not to see people. He did not treat the invisible machinery of the household as less real than the visible parts of it. On the Wednesday of the first week, she was cleaning the library, the large one, on the second floor, which she had been assigned for the first time that morning, and she found him already there. He was at the reading table with a set of estate maps, making notes in the margins in the precise, angular handwriting she had seen on letters crossing Mrs. Colm's desk. "I can come back," she said. "You don't have to," he said, without looking up. She cleaned the library. He worked at the table. They occupied the room for an hour without speaking, and it was, she realized afterward, The most comfortable she had felt in a room with another person in a considerable time. Not because anything was said, because nothing was required. She filed this as well. Lady Isolde Ashmore arrived on the Friday of the first week. She had been in London. She spent the season months in London and the winter months at Ashmore, which was an arrangement that suited her nature, which was the nature of a woman who finds country quiet useful in small doses and exhausting in large ones. She arrived in the afternoon in her own carriage, was greeted by the staff in the front drive, and swept through the house with the specific, territorial energy of a woman returning to a space she considers fundamentally hers regardless of who technically owns it. Seraphine was in the corridor when Lady Isolde came through. The older woman stopped when she saw her. She looked at Seraphine with eyes that were, behind their social surface, extraordinarily sharp. "You are the maid," she said. "Yes, my lady," Seraphine said. "The one from the ballroom." "Yes, my lady." Lady Isolde looked at her for a long moment. At the brooch. At her face. "Come to my rooms this evening," she said. "After dinner. I would like to speak with you." She continued down the corridor. Seraphine stood in the corridor and thought, "She knows." Lady Isolde's rooms were the most personal space in Ashmore Hall, private in the way that the rest of the house, with its formal rooms and its estate functions, was not. She had been in this house for 42 years, since her marriage to the fourth Duke, and she had made the rooms hers with the focused determination of a woman who had learned early that territory is claimed through daily, deliberate act. She poured the tea herself. She did not offer Seraphine a seat immediately, which was a test, and Seraphine recognized it as such and stood comfortably without appearing to wait for the invitation. After a moment, Lady Isolde sat and gestured. Seraphine sat. "My husband's sister," Lady Isolde said. "Lisa." She set down the teapot with precision. "I came to this house 6 months after she left. I knew of her only through her absence, through the rooms that were cleared and the name that was not spoken." She looked at Seraphine. "I found her portrait in the East Wing attic in my 3rd year here. I had it brought down and hung in the private corridor on the 1st floor. My husband never knew." Seraphine was quiet. "Why?" she asked. "Because it seemed wrong to me," Lady Isolde said simply, "that a person should be erased from a house they were born in because they made a choice their father disapproved of." She looked at the foxglove brooch. "I knew the brooch from the portrait. When Callan told me last night." She stopped. "He told you he recognized it in the ballroom?" "Yes," Seraphine said. "He has been to that portrait," Lady Isolde said, "more times than you would expect a man of his reserve to admit to. He was fond of the idea of her, of an aunt he never met who chose love over title." A pause. "He has been somewhat less fond of the idea that his father did not reply to her letter." "He told you about that?" "He told me last night," she said. "I had not known. My husband did not tell me." She was quiet for a moment. 42 years of marriage, and there are still rooms I have not been shown." Seraphine looked at this woman, 65 years old, still sharp, with the quality of someone who has long since made peace with what her life contained and what it did not, and manages what she has with complete authority. "What do you want from me?" Seraphine said. "I want to know what you intend to do," Lady Isolde said. "About Callan's proposal. I have not decided." "Then let me tell you what I know about my son," she said. "What the county does not know, and what he would not tell you himself." She set down her cup. "Callan has been managing this estate since he was 22. Not since his father's death, since 22, when it became clear that his father was not going to manage it himself. He has not taken a season in London in 11 years. He has not accepted a social engagement in 7. He has been here, in this house, in these grounds, working, not because he has no other options, but because he understands that things left unmanaged fall into ruin, and he will not allow that to happen." She looked at Seraphine. He proposed to you partly for the reasons he stated, but also because you are the first person who has stood in his house and shown him something he had never seen in it before. What is that? Seraphine asked. Someone who will not be managed, Lady Isolde said. Lord Davin Crest returned in the second week. He had not been invited. This was not unusual for Crest. He treated Ashmore as an open house in the way that men of his generation treated all houses belonging to people they considered friends, which was to say with complete disregard for whether his presence was wanted. He arrived on a Tuesday, before lunch, with 2 hounds and a manservant in the easy, expansive manner of someone who does not read rooms because he has never needed to. Kaelin received him in the front hall with the controlled courtesy of a man who has decided not to act on his instincts. Seraphine observed this from the upper staircase. She watched Crest greet the Duke with the warmth of an old friend and saw, in Kaelin's response, the specific quality of a man managing something precisely. Not hostility, not welcome, but the neutral courtesy you extend to someone whose departure you are working toward. She went back to work. She was in the east corridor 2 hours later when she heard them, voices, from the small sitting room at the end of the hall. The door was not fully closed. The girl is Lisa's granddaughter, Crest was saying. His voice was flat now, stripped of the social warmth. I made inquiries. Pemberton and London confirmed the lineage. Then you have been making inquiries about my household, Kaelin said. I have been concerned. About what specifically? About what she knows and what she intends. A pause. Ashmore, you cannot seriously be considering. What I am considering, Kaelin said, is not your concern. It is my concern when it affects the family's standing, the estate's reputation. What will be said when it becomes known that you have proposed to a parlour maid? The parlour maid, Kaelin said, is the legitimate descendant of my father's sister, whose inheritance was denied through an arrangement that does not reflect well on this family. The proposal corrects that. It creates a scandal, Crest said. Society will. Society will adjust, Kaelin said. It always does. A pause. Then Crest's voice, lower, with a different quality, the quality of a man who has been building to something and has decided this is the moment. There are things about Lisa's departure that you do not know, that your mother does not know, matters concerning the circumstances of her leaving that were handled privately by your grandfather and your father. Silence. What matters? Kaelin said. Matters that should be discussed, Crest said, before you commit to anything that cannot be undone. Seraphine stood very still in the corridor. Tell me what you mean, Kaelin said. Not here, Crest said. There are documents. I have had them for some time. I was not certain whether to bring them forward, but given what you are apparently planning. Documents about Lisa. About Lisa and about the reason she left. The real reason. Not the story the family tells. A long silence. Bring them to the study, Kaelin said. This evening. Seraphine heard movement. She moved away from the door, back down the corridor, before either of them emerged. She reached her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. Documents about Lisa. About the real reason she left. She thought about what she knew of her grandmother's story, the schoolteacher, the father's ultimatum, the night departure. She had accepted this as the whole picture because it was the only picture she had. She was beginning to understand that every picture she had been given was partial. She needed to know what was in those documents. And she needed to know before Kaelin decided what to do with the information. She went to Orlon Fitch. The estate steward had been at Ashmore for 29 years. He was a man of 50 with the economy of movement and expression of someone who has learned, over decades, that most of what happens in a house happens below the surface that everyone discusses, and that the surface is largely maintained for the benefit of people who don't want to look lower. She found him in the estate office, a room of maps and ledgers, and the specific, practical order of a man who manages a large and complex operation by ensuring that everything has a location and remains in it. Orlon, she said. He looked up. He had been calling her Seraphine since the 4th day of her employment, which had surprised her and which she now understood differently. You knew, she said. He put down his pen. Sit down, he said. You knew who I was, she said. Before the ballroom. Before any of it. I suspected, he said. When you arrived. The name Vale. The Crestwick connection. The brooch. He paused. I was not certain until the night of the gathering. And you didn't say anything. It was not mine to say, he said. And I was not certain what it meant for you. Whether knowing would help or harm. He looked at her directly. I told Mrs. Colm. When we were sure. Mrs. Colm, she said. Who selected me from 12 applicants. Yes, he said. She sat with this. Mrs. Colm had brought her to this house deliberately. Had placed her here, in the position that would give her access to the rooms and rhythms of the household, knowing who she was. Not the Duke's doing, Mrs. Colm's. A woman of 50 who had been keeping Lisa Ashmore's existence alive in this house through 30 years of quiet, stubborn action, who had brought the portrait down from the attic, who had hired a parlour maid whose grandmother had been expelled from the house for loving the wrong man. What are the documents Crest has? She said. Fitch looked at her. What documents? He has something. About Lisa. About the real reason she left. She watched his face. You know. He was very still. What did you hear? Enough, she said. What are they? He looked at the desk. He looked at the ledger in front of him. He looked at her. There was a reason, he said slowly, beyond the schoolteacher. A reason Lisa's father wanted her gone quickly and completely. A reason the departure had to be total, no contact, no return, no claim. He paused. Lisa knew something. About this estate. About a transaction your great-grandfather made with a consortium of landowners 40 years ago. A transaction that was not properly recorded. That benefited the Ashmore estate significantly and was damaging to the families it was made with. He looked at her. She had found the ledger. She had understood it. Her father knew she had understood it. She was not expelled for loving a schoolteacher, Seraphine said. That was part of it, Fitch said. But she was expelled because she was a liability. Because she knew something that could still. He stopped. If those documents are what I believe they are not evidence of Lisa's wrongdoing. They are evidence of the Ashmore estates. Seraphine stood. Where is this ledger now? She said. I believe, Fitch said carefully, that Crest has it. She looked at him. Crest has a ledger that implicates the Ashmore estate in fraudulent transactions. And he is in this house right now. Yes, Fitch said. And he is about to use it to persuade Callan to end the proposal. That would be my assessment, Fitch said. She was already at the door. She did not go to the study that evening. She went to the library, the second-floor library where she had spent an hour in Callan's quiet company on the Wednesday, and she went to the section of shelves that held the estate histories. Not the official, published histories, the private records. The ledgers and survey books and transaction records that the Ashmore family had kept for 200 years in the specific, accumulated way of people who understand that paper is power. She had been in this room 3 times. She knew where everything was. She found it on the 3rd shelf from the bottom, behind a volume of agricultural surveys from 1841, a ledger, dark red cover, unmarked. She took it to the reading table. She opened it. It was a transaction record from 1853. The Duke at the time, Callan's great-grandfather, had entered into an arrangement for neighboring landowners. The arrangement concerned water rights along the Ashmore River, the rights to redirect water flow for irrigation, which affected downstream properties significantly. The record showed that the arrangement had been made in favor of Ashmore at the expense of the 4 neighboring families, and that the evidence submitted to the county authority at the time had been. She read the margins, where a later hand had made notes, altered. Key measurements changed. Surveys adjusted. The county authority had approved the arrangement on the basis of falsified evidence. She turned pages. A second section, in a different hand. This one she recognized from the estate letters as Kaelin's grandfather's writing. Notes about Lisa. About her discovery of the ledger. About the need to remove her from the house before the matter was brought before the county authority for review. The review had been scheduled for 1869, 2 months after Lisa left. The review had been canceled. No explanation given. She closed the ledger. So this was the architecture. Lisa Ashmore had discovered that her family had committed fraud in a matter affecting 4 other families, had been removed from the house before she could be called as a witness, and had spent the rest of her life in Crestwick with a schoolteacher, never speaking of it, wearing a foxglove brooch on Sundays. Crest had a copy of this ledger, or the original, or some version of the documentation, and he was using it as leverage, not to expose the fraud, necessarily, but to manage the situation, to give himself power over this household, over Kaelin, over the proposal. She looked at the ledger in her hands. She thought about what it meant. The 4 families affected by the fraudulent water rights arrangement, their names were in the record. She turned back to the early pages and read them. She recognized 2 families still in the county, still present in the social landscape, whose current relationships with the Ashmore estate she had observed. She thought about what it would mean to bring this forward, what it would cost, what it would repair. She thought about Lisa, who had known and had been silenced, and who had died in Crestwick at 61 without having been able to say anything. She put the ledger inside her working apron. She left the library. Kaelin was in the study with Crest when she knocked. "Your Grace," she said, when Kaelin opened the door. "I apologize for the interruption. I need 2 minutes." Crest, behind Kaelin, looked at her with an expression she could read precisely. The expression of a man who has underestimated someone and is in the process of revising. "Now is not," Kaelin began. "Now," she said, quietly. "Please." He looked at her face. He stepped into the corridor and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. "What is it?" he said. She took the ledger from her apron. She placed it in his hands. "I found this in the library," she said. "It concerns your great-grandfather. A transaction from 1853 regarding water rights." She held his gaze. "It is also the real reason Lisa was expelled. She found this. Your grandfather removed her before she could be a witness at the county review." She paused. "Lord Crest has a copy, or the original. He brought it tonight to use as leverage against the proposal. I assume his plan is to suggest that Lisa's granddaughter knowing about this is a liability, that you should withdraw the proposal to keep me at a manageable distance." Kaelin looked at the ledger. He looked at her. "How did you find this?" he said. "Fitch told me about it," she said. "I found the ledger myself." She paused. "I want you to know before you go back into that room what he has, and what he intends to do with it. What you do with the information is your decision." He looked at the ledger. "What would you do?" he said. "That is not. I am asking genuinely," he said. "What would you do?" She looked at him. "I would bring it forward," she said, "to the county authority. Voluntarily. I would contact the families affected, explain the history, and propose a resolution. The fraud is old and most of the original parties are dead, but there are descendants. And doing it voluntarily, before Crest uses it, gives you the one thing you cannot have if you wait. Which is control of your own story," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Go back to your room," he said. "I'll handle this." "Kaelin." "Seraphine," he said. And the way he said her name, directly, without any of the social apparatus of title or position, was so unexpected that she stopped. "I heard you. I will handle it. Trust me for one evening." She held his gaze. Then she nodded. She went to her room. She sat on the bed and looked at the foxglove brooch in her hand and thought about trust, about what it cost to extend it and what it meant to decide to. An hour later, she heard Crest's carriage on the drive. He was leaving. The county knew within a week. Not the full story. The county never receives the full story. It receives the version that travels fastest, which is the most dramatic version stripped of its complicating truths. What the county received was, the Duke of Ashmore had proposed marriage to a parlour maid, that she had refused to kneel in his ballroom, and he had married her for it, that she was Lisa Ashmore's granddaughter, that there was something about an old ledger and a water rights dispute. The specific inaccuracies mattered less than the general shape, which was scandal. The invitations to the autumn gatherings of 3 neighboring houses were withdrawn. 2 of Kalen's political associations sent letters of careful, formal distance. A piece appeared in the county circular and signed, describing the situation with the specific, opaque meanness of a publication that wants to damage someone without being traceable. Lady Isolde received 3 separate letters from friends who described themselves as concerned. Seraphine read none of these things directly, but she knew about them in the way that people who work in houses know about everything. Through the quality of the silences, the small adjustments in how people spoke to her, the particular expression on Mrs. Colm's face at the morning briefing on the Wednesday. She had still not given Kalen her answer. She found herself, in this week, thinking about it differently than she had in the first 2 weeks. Before the ballroom, before the study, before Lisa and Crest and the ledger, she had been thinking about it as a question of what she was willing to accept. Whether the practical benefits were worth the discomfort of the position, the complications of the history. Now she was thinking about it differently. She was thinking about what she was willing to stand for. She was in the East Garden on a Friday morning when Kalen found her. She had been there for an hour, having decided that the garden was where she did her clearest thinking. It was not the rose bed she had found in other houses she'd read about. It was a working kitchen garden, practical and slightly untidy, which she liked considerably more. He came around the hedge and stopped when he saw her. He was in riding clothes. He had been out on the north fields again, which he did most mornings before the household business began. "I owe you an account," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I would like to give you one regardless." He came to the bench at the edge of the garden, stone, old, slightly mossy. He sat. After a moment, she sat beside him, which was the first time they had been seated at the same level in close proximity, and the lack of the desk between them was noticeable. "I told Crest that I had the original ledger," he said, "and that his copy was therefore redundant. I told him that I intended to bring the matter to the county authority voluntarily, and that if he chose to use his copy for any purpose, I would ensure his role in suppressing the information for. He has held it for 6 years. It emerged, was part of the official record." He paused. He left without the response he had come to deliver. "And the county authority?" she said. "My solicitor is preparing the submission," he said. "The affected families will be contacted. There will be a resolution process. It will be expensive and complicated and will not make the county think better of the Ashmore name in the short term." He looked at the garden. "But it is the correct thing." "Yes," she said. "I want to tell you why I am doing it," he said. "Not because you found the ledger. Not because Crest forced the issue. Because my grandmother expelled his own daughter from this house to cover a transaction that hurt 4 other families. And then my father failed to reply to her letter, and my grandfather buried the review. And this family has been carrying that for 40 years while building a reputation for integrity that was substantially managed." He looked at her. "I do not want to manage my reputation. I want to deserve it." She looked at him. This was, she thought, the most he had said to her at one time. Not because he was being unusually verbose. It was still less than most people said. Because every word was chosen and every word was true. Seraphine, he said. Yes. The proposal stands, he said. Regardless of what you decide. The inheritance matter will be resolved independently. You have options that do not require marrying me. I want you to know that. I know, she said. But I would like you to consider, he stopped. He was quiet for a moment. She recognized this, the specific quality of his silence when he was managing the rate at which he released something. Say it, she said. He looked at the kitchen garden. I have not wanted something for myself in a very long time, he said. I want this. Not the estate management of it, not the bloodline correction. I want you to say yes because you want to. He paused. I recognize that I have not given you much reason to want to, given the circumstances. But I am asking anyway. She looked at him for a long time. You are the most difficult person, she said, to know the right answer about. I know, he said. Every time I think I understand what you are, she said. You do something that requires me to revise. Is that? I have not decided yet whether that is a problem, she said. He was quiet. Give me until Sunday, she said. You have until Sunday, he said. He stood. He looked at the garden. The parsnips in the third row are crowding the carrots, he said. She looked. He was correct. I know, she said. I am dealing with it. He left the garden. She sat on the mossy bench and looked at the crowded third row and thought about a woman named Lisa who had left this place and come back. Through her granddaughter's presence. About what it would mean to stay. About what it would mean to leave. The county authority hearing was held in the third week of November, in the assembly rooms in the market town of Harwick, which was 8 miles from Ashmore and the administrative center for the district. Callan had requested the hearing. He had submitted the ledger and the accompanying documentation, including a statement of family history that was honest to the point of personal discomfort, an account that placed the fraudulent transaction, the suppression of the review, and Lisa's expulsion in their correct relationship to each other without making any attempt to minimize what the family had done. The hearing was public. This had not been required. Callan had made it public. The room was full. Seraphine sat in the gallery, not at Callan's side, which would have been a statement before she was ready to make one, but present, which was its own kind of statement. Lady Isolde sat 3 seats to her left. Mrs. Colm and Fitch were at the back of the room. The representatives of the 4 affected families sat at the main table. 3 of them were descendants of the original parties. The original landowners were long dead. One, a woman of 60 named Mrs. Prentworth, was the original signatory's daughter and had been 12 years old when the fraudulent arrangement had rerouted the water from her family's fields. Callan stood at the front of the room and gave his account. He did not perform it. He did not make it more dramatic than it was. He simply stated the history, the 1853 transaction, the falsified evidence, the suppressed review, his great-grandmother's discovery, and his great-grandfather's response, and the chain of subsequent decisions that had maintained the arrangement for 40 years. He stated what he proposed as resolution, a transfer of funds equivalent to the calculated loss of the affected properties over the period drawn from the Ashmore estate. He stated that the calculation had been made by an independent assessor and was available for review. Mrs. Prentworth, who had been 12 years old and had watched her father's fields go dry and had understood, as a 12-year-old, that something had gone wrong even if she could not have named it, looked at Callan Ashmore across the room and said, "Why now?" "Because it should have been done 40 years ago," he said. "Because someone in my family knew and was expelled rather than permitted to bring it forward. And because I am tired," he said, with a precision that carried across the room, "of this estate's reputation being built on things we did rather than things we are." The room was quiet. Mrs. Prentworth looked at the gallery. She looked at Seraphine. She had clearly been told, or had worked out, or had the specific intelligence of someone who has spent 60 years paying attention to what people do not say. She looked at Seraphine in the gallery with an expression that took in the foxglove brooch and the quality of her posture and the fact of her presence in this room. She looked back at Callan. "My father would have liked this day," she said. The hearing proceeded. It was in the corridor outside the assembly rooms afterward that Lord Davin Crest appeared. He had not been inside. He had not been invited and would not have been admitted, having been formally identified in Callan's submission as the person who had held the documentation for 6 years. He was outside, with the expression of a man who has arrived to observe a situation that has gone badly for him and is trying to decide what face to put on it. He looked at Callan. He looked at Seraphine, who was beside Callan now, which was a decision she had made in the moment of leaving the gallery without fully accounting for it. "You have made a spectacle," Crest said. "I have made a record," Callan said. The county will find another subject within a month," Callan said. "In my experience, the county always does." He looked at Crest with the steady, level attention that was the most unnerving thing he did. "Your arrangement with my grandfather's estate manager regarding the retention of the documentation has been noted in the submission. If you hold any other documentation pertaining to this family or its history, I would recommend bringing it forward directly to Pemberton. The alternative is considerably less comfortable." Crest looked at him. He looked at Seraphine. "You," he said to her, with the specific anger of a man who has been managed by someone he underestimated and has not yet processed it, "are not what you appear to be." "No," she said, "I am not." She looked at him with an expression that was not triumphant. Triumph was not something she was interested in performing, but direct. The same expression she had worn in the ballroom. Simply present. Simply herself. Crest left. Callan looked at her. "Sunday," she said. "Yes," he said. "I have my answer," she said. He waited. She looked at the assembly room behind them. At the county gathered inside it, processing what had just been presented to them. At the oak trees lining the Harwick Road. At the morning sky. "Yes," she said. He was very still. "Yes," she said again. "I will marry you. Not because of the inheritance, and not because of the bloodline, and not because it is the most manageable resolution." She looked at him directly. "Because you stood in that room and told the truth when the managed version was available, and you chose not to take it. Because you did not give me a reason to say yes. You gave me a reason to want to." She paused. "Those are different things." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "They are." They stood outside the assembly rooms in the cold November morning while the county moved around them, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, which was, in its way, the most eloquent conversation they had had. The wedding was in December, in the chapel at Ashmore. Not a county event. Not the social performance of a duke's marriage with its guest lists and its politics and its 60 people and its ballroom. A small gathering. Mrs. Colm, Fitch, Lady Isolde, who had cried precisely once during the preparations and had not acknowledged it. Seraphine's brother, who had arrived from Crestwick the night before and spent the evening in the estate kitchen talking to the cook about absolutely nothing, because he did not yet know what to do with the fact of where his sister's life had gone. And Pemberton, who had handled the legal proceedings, and who was as close to a personal friend as either Callan or Seraphine had permitted themselves in recent years. The ceremony was conducted by the local vicar, who had known Callan since he was 7, and who performed it with the specific warmth of someone for whom this is not a formal duty, but a genuine occasion. Seraphine wore her mother's foxglove brooch. She wore it at her collar, as she always had, and she walked into the chapel in a dress that was not the elaborate construction of a county duchess's wedding, but a simple and excellent dress in deep green that Mrs. Colm had arranged with the focused efficiency of a woman who has been waiting to do this for 30 years. Kaelin was at the altar. He was not composed. This was the thing she noticed when she came through the chapel door and looked at him. He was not performing composure. He was simply there, looking at her with an expression that was entirely unmanaged, and the absence of the management was more overwhelming than any declaration could have been. She walked to him. They made their vows in the cold December chapel while the stained glass put its winter light across the stone floor, and the handful of people who mattered to them stood in the pews, and the vicar said the words that had been said in this chapel for 200 years. When it was done, Kaelin took her hand. Not the formal gesture, simply her hand, the way she had seen him handle things he valued, with care, without performance. She held it back. The estate continued. This was the thing about Ashmore Hall that Seraphine understood more fully in the year that followed, that it was a living thing, a working thing, and the business of it did not pause for weddings or revelations or the correction of 40-year-old frauds. The tenants needed their drainage resolved. The kitchen garden needed its third row sorted out. The ledgers needed to be correct. The 4 affected families needed their resolution process completed. She did all of it, not alone, with Kaelin and with Fitch and with Mrs. Colm, who had been managing this estate with invisible competence for 30 years and whose competence became visible because Seraphine made a point of making it visible. She wrote to Mrs. Prentworth in January, a private letter outside the formal resolution process, which concerned nothing legal and everything human. She told her about Lisa, about the foxglove brooch in Crestwick and the schoolteacher and the Sunday mornings, about a woman who had known something important and had been sent away rather than permitted to say it, and who had spent the rest of her life raising 2 children in a village for miles from the estate that had expelled her. Mrs. Prentworth replied within a week. Her letter was 3 pages long. The last page said, "Your grandmother was owed better than she received. The fact that her granddaughter is now in the house she was expelled from seems, to me, exactly the kind of correction the world occasionally manages to make." Seraphine read this letter at the breakfast table. Kaelin was across from her, in his usual position, with an estate survey and his coffee. "Good news?" he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her face, at the specific quality of expression she wore when something had moved her, and she was not going to say how much. He had learned to read it. "Prentworth," he said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. He returned to his survey. She looked at him across the table. At this man, 40 years old, angular, quiet, with his estate maps and his angular handwriting and the specific, unceremonious way he moved through the world. He was not the man the county talked about. He was considerably more interesting than that. "Kaelin," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said. He looked up. "For what?" "For not managing me," she said. "For giving me information and letting me make decisions with it. For the hearing. For Prentworth." She paused. "For the brooch. For seeing it in the ballroom and not deciding what to do with it before you had spoken to me." He held her gaze. "You are more difficult to manage than most things," he said. "I know," she said. "That is not a complaint," he said. She looked at him. The ghost of something, the thing that was his version of amusement, that she had been learning to read for weeks before she understood what it was, moved across his face. She poured his coffee. He returned to his maps. In the spring, she found the portrait. Not in the attic. Lady Isolde had moved it years ago, to the private corridor on the first floor. She had known it was there. She had been passing it every day for months without fully looking at it. She looked at it in March. Lisa Ashmore, painted in 1866, 3 years before she left. 22 years old. Dark hair. A direct gaze that had the specific, unblinking steadiness of a person who has decided to look at things clearly. At her collar, a foxglove brooch. Seraphine stood in front of the portrait for a long time. She thought about the walk from this house to Crestwick, for miles, on a night in 1869, with nothing but the clothes she wore and the brooch at her collar. She thought about the schoolteacher who had been worth it, about the daughter they had raised and the house they had kept and the Sundays with the brooch, and the things that were never said. She thought about the county authority hearing and Mrs. Printworth and the letter with 3 pages. She thought about standing in a ballroom and not kneeling. She reached up and straightened the portrait. It had been slightly askew, she realized, probably for years, and she looked at her grandmother's face in the morning light. "I found my way back," she said. It took a while. She left the corridor. The Ashmore estate, in the years that followed, became known for something it had not previously been known for. Not in the county's whispered version of things, not in the performance of aristocratic reputation, but in the actual, daily, accumulated reality of how it was managed. It was known for being a house that told the truth about itself. Not a comfortable house, necessarily. Truth is rarely comfortable, but a house that dealt honestly with its land, its tenants, its history, and its obligations. A house where the ledgers were correct because the people who kept them understood that accuracy was not a technicality, but a form of respect. And in the East Garden, in the kitchen beds that had been slightly untidy when Seraphine arrived and had been restored to productive order in the first spring of her marriage, there was a bed of foxgloves along the south wall. Not the practical kind, not the vegetable beds, just foxgloves, planted deliberately, in deep purple and pale pink, which came back every year without being replanted. Nobody asked about them specifically. They were simply there, part of the garden, which was part of the house, which was part of the story that had been 27 years in the finding and had arrived, finally, where it belonged. Some stories take generations to complete. Lisa Ashmore walked out of this house in 1869 with a foxglove brooch and a decision that the world called reckless, and she called the only honest thing available to her. Her granddaughter walked back in, 27 years later, as a parlour maid with a working apron and the same specific quality of stillness. The quality of a person who has decided what she will and will not do and is prepared to live with the difference. She did not kneel, and everything that followed came from that. Not because defiance is always right, but because sometimes the most radical thing a person can do is simply stand still and be exactly who they are, in a room full of people who are waiting for them to be something easier. Seraphine Vale stood still, and the house, which had been waiting for 27 years for someone to do exactly that, finally found its way back to itself. The end.